I'm a language teacher and I'm here today to make an important confession. I can't really teach you a language. Not only that, nobody can teach you a language. If you want to know why, watch this video till the end. Ciao everybody and welcome. I'm Mattia from Lingua Franca. In my everyday life I work as an English teacher and I've been uploading videos on this channel for over 1 year now, teaching Italian and talking about language learning. So why am I telling you that no one can teach you a language? In order to understand that, we have to take a step back. I want you all to think about when you were in school and you probably had to study a foreign language. Depending on where you live, it might have been English, French, Spanish, or a number of other languages. But whichever language you studied in school, the result is almost always the same. You haven't really learned it. You studied that language for 5 or even 10 years, possibly getting good grades. And yet, the first time you happen to use that language in real life, you probably realized something. You weren't able to understand what was told to you, and you couldn't say everything you wanted to say. How come that after all those years studying a language, you only got to such a low level? Maybe you ended up thinking that language learning wasn't for you. After all, if you haven't learned a language with a teacher who spent multiple hours a week teaching it to you, learning a foreign language might be just impossible for you. If that thought crossed your mind, take a deep breath and smile, because that's not the case. It is almost certainly a limiting belief. Let me explain what I mean. Most people see teaching as follows. There's a person that has a lot of knowledge about something. This person, through effort and good strategies, can hand that knowledge over to you. Now, this picture might be fine for subjects that are highly knowledge-based. If you don't know when America was discovered and a teacher tells you a bunch of times that it happened in 1492, at some point you will remember it. You might have to think about it for a minute, but sooner or later that piece of knowledge will stick to your brain. The issue is that speaking a foreign language is mostly a skill, not a knowledge. And yet, it is almost always taught as if it were a knowledge. To understand the difference, think about a different skill. Riding a bicycle. Imagine that riding a bike was a school subject. The first year you sit in a class for a few hours a week and the person in front of you, the professor, knows how to ride a bike quite well. This professor spends his time explaining how each part of the bike works, how the wheels turn, how the chain and the gears work, and how much you need to push on the pedals to go forward. Month after month, you feel more and more confident. You answer all questions correctly when a written test comes up, and sometimes the professor makes you try to ride a toy bike with little wheels. You try it and, surprisingly, you realize that you can do what the teacher is asking, even if you struggle a bit. After many years of this, you feel ready. You buy a real bike, you get on a street and you jump on it. In your head you have hundreds of hours of theory and you could name each and every little part of the bicycle. You also know the history of bikes well enough. Filled with emotion, you try to move forward and you find yourself lying on the ground. And you don't even know how it happened. You think about the past years and you wonder how it's happened. Maybe riding a bike is not for you. But the more you think about it, the more you realize that even though you spent all these years studying bicycles, this is the first time you try and ride a real bike with no little wheels and no one holding you. So does the fall still surprise you? Well, it probably doesn't, and if you think about it, this is exactly how languages are often taught. You have a teacher explaining to you every technical detail, every grammar rule, every exception of that language over the course of several years. Once in a while, you're called for an oral or written test on a very specific topic. And it's hard anyway, because you have to speak or write a language that you've only heard in some recordings or spoken by the teacher. Besides, you have to do it in front of a whole class of your peers staring at you. Clearly, the first time you try to use this language in the real world, the results won't be great. And at this point, it's very easy to fall into a negative mindset. Languages are not my thing. But if no one can teach you a language, how come that so many people learn to speak them, even as adults? The answer is, in fact, great news. Passing a skill from person to person might not be possible, but it doesn't mean that that skill can't be learned. Not only that, it can be learned in a much shorter amount of time compared to your scholastic experience. But, and this is of paramount importance, you have to take responsibility for learning it. Because the greatest difference between those who end up learning a language and those who don't is that the ones who do usually took responsibility in their hands and put proactive effort into learning it. The ones who don't learn it keep waiting for someone to teach it to them. So that's the first step. You have to consciously decide that it's all in your hands. And beware, this doesn't mean that classes, videos, courses and textbooks are useless, because they're not. But they still come after your personal responsibility. Before we move on to the actionable part, according to YouTube, more than half of you watching this video are not subscribed to Lingua Franca. If you're enjoying this content, consider subscribing to Lingua Franca, so you won't miss future videos. But we were talking about personal responsibility. That's good and all, but how can you actually learn a language? Well, let's start with the good news. In the history of mankind, it's never been easier to find resources and connect with people everywhere in the world. Until just a few years ago, no one could have found thousands of hours of video and audio material in their target language in a matter of minutes. In the same way, no one could speak with someone on the other side of the world almost as if they were in the same room. Today, these things are the new normal. And that's your strength, accepting the fact that whether you're enrolled into a class or not, the most important time is the one that you dedicate individually to that language. This video is not the proper place where to explain what I think are the best steps to learn a language. Otherwise, it would end up lasting hours, and you can find other videos on the channel if you want. But here's an example. All modern researches on language learning tell us that exposure to a language is fundamental. Nevertheless, most people try to listen to an audiobook or to watch a video once, and because they can only understand a small percentage of what they hear, they become frustrated and quit. If you don't know what exposure is, I explain it in the video you can find up here and in description. This is the breaking point between those who will learn a language and those who will keep waiting to be taught. So my advice is actually very simple, even though it might be hard to act on it. Stop waiting for someone to teach you a language. Stop trying to find the very best resources and material. Accept personal responsibility over learning that language and the fact that you are the most important person in your path of language acquisition. Then accept the fact that you're going to make mistakes. Accept the fact that you won't understand everything all the time and you won't always be able to say what you want to say, but it will all be part of the journey. And if you want more tips on the best language learning strategies and techniques, I suggest you watch the videos you can find in this playlist. You won't find much about grammar or vocabulary, but actionable advice to actually learn a language. And if you like this video, a like would be exceptional. That's all for today's video. I'll see you in the next one. Go live a language. Ciao!